Zoom to Gettysburg is designed as a friendly informational discussion with LBGs, historians, authors, and guests. Program and leaders and moderators require polite and courteous behavior of all participants. The LBGs and invited presenters will make every effort to provide accurate historical information. However, information provided in group discussion may be subject to different interpretations among all participants. Information shared herein does not guarantee passing and or successful completion of any test, exam, class, and or course, including the NPS Licensed Battlefield Guide Test. Moderators reserve the right to limit discussion and comments during the program. Zoom programs are recorded but not published at this time. By attending, you give your permission to be recorded and potentially published in the future. Tonight, we're going to welcome to the Zoom stage LBG Chris Bagley, a newly minted author. I don't want to steal his thunder. This is his first night on Zoom, and I got to work with him this morning on his slides, and I kept telling him, don't talk anymore. I want to see you tonight. It's a really good program. So that being said, Chris, go ahead and take the screen and make sure that as soon as I can hear you and see you, I'm going to zoom down and listen and enjoy the program.
All right. Well, first off, everybody, I want to thank you guys for having me. This is definitely an honor, and I want to thank Fran, Rick, and the gang over there for having me here. And I hope that this is going to be informative to you. I know that there is a lot of Gettysburg guides here and Gettysburg aficionados, but I want to talk today, or at least tonight, about a little known story that most people think about, but don't know much about. And that is the unsung hero here at Gettysburg, and that is the horse. And I found a very neat quotation, which I think is very apropos for this, that man's pathway to glory is strewn with the bones of the horse. And nothing could be any more clear than Gettysburg and the American Civil War. Now, during the American Civil War, you're going to have about 3 million of horses and mules that are going to be impressed in the service. This is North and South combined. And by the war's end, you're going to have around 1.5 million of these animals that are going to lose their lives. Now, not only did they die in combat, but they also died like the men who rode them, from wounds sustained in combat, from exposure, disease, malnutrition, you name it. And I don't think anywhere on the battlefield illustrates this any more poignantly than the Troelsel Farm. So if you take a look down here at the bottom left screen, you recognize the Troelsel Farm barn. And in the foreground, you're going to see the dead horses that are lying in Mr. Troelsel's farmyard. Now, the picture to the right, I'm not William Frazanito, but that's a fairly close area where the picture's in the same frame. So that gives you an idea where this picture was taken during or right after the battle. So horses in general did not populate the North American continent until about 500 years ago. They went extinct after the last ice age. Now, when the new country was discovered by Columbus and then further explored, they had to bring horses with them. It was just a necessity. So what did they do? They brought horses of European stock and also of Eastern stock with them to the New World. So the horses that made it here are the ones that were the very hardiest of the animals. Now, once they got here, these horses began setting up breeding, or these settlers began setting up breeding farms. And before you know it, you have new breeds of horses that are still with us today. And some of those horses, you'll recognize some of them: the thoroughbred, quarter horse, Morgans. There's the saddlebred, which of traveler fame, standard breds, and draft horses. The 3 pictures I have that are on the right side of this slide, top one, if you don't know, is Old Baldy, or what's left of him. Now, we don't know really what type of horse Baldy was. I could not find it, but looking at the pictures of him when he was alive, it is probably a reasonable bet that he might have been a standardbred, which was a common issue horse back during the Civil War. Now, the horse that is to his right, that is a thoroughbred. very prized horse, very hardy constitution, very spirited animals. And below that, well, we don't need too much in the way of introductions for this man. It's Robert E. Lee, and he is mounted on his horse Traveler, who is a saddlebred. Now, as we go through, if I know the breed of a horse, I will point it out to you. So what we're going to do now is look at the color patterns of horses, because colors are like, or horses are like many other animals and even people that come in all shapes and sizes. And if you've ever heard the story of, say, Richard Garnett, Richard Garnett was on a bay thoroughbred named Red Eye. Well, probably not too many people are familiar with what a bay is. That's a color scheme, not a breed. The thoroughbred is the breed. So take a look at the horse in the upper left-hand corner. Nice brown color. And when I talk about points, the points of a horse, the mane, the tail, lower legs, the muzzle, those points on that horse are black. So when you see this kind of horse, this is a bay. Very beautiful animals. This is what Maverick is, bay, and that's my favorite color scheme. Just FYI. If you're looking for a birthday present for me, that would be fine. Now, the horse that is next to him, this is a quarter horse. His name is Nugget. And Nugget is a golden palomino. Palominos are the blonde colored horses, but a golden palomino has more of a dark, intense golden color. And if you look at his points, he's got a blonde mane and tail, and he even has on his lower legs, front and back, what we call socks, little white socks on his legs. The horse below is called Sky. Now you're probably wondering why Sky? Well, it's a blue roan. Now, roans are basically horses that are black, bay, or sorrel, and they have interspersed in their coat white or gray hair, kind of like my beard. I don't know if you can see that. So I am a blue roan because I have black hair interspersed with gray, and so does Sky. And she is a blue roan, very beautiful and striking colored horse. Go over some more. A red roan is basically a bay, so it's going to be dark brown, but it interspersed with white and gray hairs. And you can see down below the lower legs, the mane and tail, again, black, and also black around the muzzle. And this particular horse is a Brabant, which is a form of draft horse, and this horse's name is Taz. Now, next to Taz on the right is Jet. Jet is a black quarter horse, and black horse as well, it's a black horse. And you'll notice that his back legs have white socks on them, which is not uncommon. Now, the horse that is to the right of Jet, this is a thoroughbred named Gabe, and Gabe is not a white horse. So a lot of people will mistake a white horse and a gray horse. White horses are very rare, and you can tell when you have one because their coat will not change color throughout their lifetime. They will stay that color and even into the seasons, because horses' coats will darken or lighten based on their age and also what season it is. Now, Gabe is a flea-bitten gray, and flea-bitten, if you take a look at his head and his neck, you'll see these little black spots all over it. And that's just a way to describe his coat. It's a flea-bitten color. So Gabe is a gray horse, not a white horse. Going to the bottom, we see this is Mark, and Mark is a buckskin. That's the color scheme he has. He has black points, and it gives his coat that nice tan saddle looking color that you see here. Very striking. The horse that is to the right of Mark is Caesar, and Caesar is a quarter horse, but he also has a paint scheme. Now, paint horses, some people might have heard of these. Paint horses are thoroughbreds or quarter horses that have a unique color pattern of usually brown and white. And that is exactly what Caesar is. And then finally, down in the right-hand corner, this is a strawberry roan. So if you're wondering what a sorrel horse looks like, she's more sorrel in this than roan. It is a reddish brown color, but you can take a look along her midsection and going back to her rump that she also has some interspersed white and gray hair. So that would make her a strawberry roan. Now, horses are interesting animals because they're prey, they're not predator. And out of all the animals that are put on this earth, you would think something like a horse would be the least likely to be used in battle. Because let me tell you something, there's only two things that will scare or spook a horse. Things that move and things that don't move. I've seen the bravest and most sturdy horses spook and get real skittish around a plastic bag from Walmart. And that is one of the reasons is their senses are on very high alert, being prey. Their eyesight is very good, hearing very good, their sense of smell and also their sense of touch, all heightened because they are prey. And horses, and many times if they are scared or spooked, they tend to run first and ask questions later. So that kind of brings us over to the little cartoon, how your horse sees himself after not spooking the squirrel is not too far from the mark. If you ever seen a herd of horses and all of a sudden one starts to run and they all bolt, they're probably running in mass because somebody got spooked, or quite possible. Yeah, find my mouse down here. So we like to have these little cartoons to just kind of lighten up the mood and, you know, make people laugh a little bit. But people that own horses, if there's, I know that there's a couple people out there that own horses. I saw you on here, but this is so true. Horses get spooked by the weirdest things and there's no rhyme or reason to it. You can have a horse that you think is bomb-proof and he's going to freak out because there is a shoe sitting in the middle of the road that he is not used to. So again, the question begs to be asked, how do you train these animals to get ready for a war? Well, horses respond to the applications of pressure, and pressure might be something as simple as squeezing with your heels or applying a spur to get your horse to go. Once the horse does exactly what you've asked them to, in this case, squeeze to go, and the horse starts moving, you release the pressure. Horses don't like that kind of thing. They don't like being squeezed with spurs. So they know if they go, you're going to stop spurring them. So that becomes the incentive for them to obey your command. And as we see, this will get on into further methods of training on how you get your horse to move side to side, front to back, how you get them to go, how you get them to stop, how you would get them to charge, say over East Cavalry Field. There are definite ways that you have to do this, but training horses is a very time-consuming thing to do. But the first thing you have to do is respect the horse. This is a 1,000-pound animal on average, and if they wanted to, they could potentially flatten you like a bug and it wouldn't even bother them. So you have to respect the horse, but you also can't be afraid of the horse. You have to get the horse to respect you. There's only one leader in this equation, and it's got to be the man or the woman on the horse's back. And particularly during the Civil War, you're going to have the leader is the one that is riding the horse, not the horse itself. So in order to see how they trained these animals back then, we have to look at how they train them today, because honestly, it is not all that much different. It's just the matter of time. Back then, they were pressed for time. Now you can take, more time to make sure your horse is properly trained. I'm going to minimize this. Here we go. So training in modern times, what are you going to do? You're not just going to throw a saddle on your horse and ride off into the sunset. That is not a good idea, especially if you don't know the horse. You could end up very sore and very disappointed. So if you don't know how to train a horse, you're probably going to have a professional trainer come in. And by the way, I need to make a disclaimer. Some person on Facebook referred to me as a horse master. And I thought that was probably one of the more comical things I have heard. I am nothing of the sort. I know enough about horses to make me dangerous. I just happen to love them. I like riding horses. I love being around them. I enjoy their company. And as such, I did a little bit of extra research and put this book together. So again, don't believe everything I say, research everything I say. And if you find that I'm wrong, please, by all means, call me on it. So the horses are going to be placed into a round pen. This is basically a fenced-in area that's shaped like a circle. The trainer will be able to leave, but the horse cannot. Usually the fence is up high enough that the horse can't jump over it. Now, things are going to take place inside this environment, and the horse is going to be exposed to different items that are training aids. One of them is basically, it's a stick with a leather cord on the end of it. It's going to measure about maybe 6 to 8 feet in length, and it serves as an extension of the trainer's arm. Now, we're going to learn that horses don't like to move their feet all too well. They want to do it when it suits them. So whether they're going to go to get, graze on grass, get a drink of water, maybe go to where there is shade, that serves their purpose. They don't like other people telling them what to do. But the first thing that is taught is to get control of that animal's legs. Once you show the animal that you can move him left, right, back, forward, now you're going to begin to build a relationship that is not based on brute force, but trust, because horses respond to gentle training. Abusing an animal is counterproductive. All you're going to end up doing is creating a hostile brute. So slapping horses, striking them you don't want to do that. And even General McClellan emphasized in his cavalry manual, he emphasized that gentle but fair and firm training is the way to go. So when you have this horse in the round pen, what are you going to do? Well, you want him to say, walk, just something simple, walk around the pen for me. So the one thing you do is you point. Well, the horse doesn't know what that means. It's not his fault. Then you might make, say, a little clicking noise while pointing. And you hear people do that when they want their horse to go. It's kind of a noise. If the horse still isn't moving, well, that's where that rope or that cord and stick come in handy. You're going to use it to maybe make a swatting motion at the horse's rump that's going to drive home what you want him to do, because eventually that horse is going to start walking. Once it does that, what do? You remove the stimulus, drop your hands and quit aggravating the horse, and only reintroduce that if he stops doing what you're telling him to do. So we can see applications of this. I'm going to rewind this here. Make sure you got your volume up a little bit. This horse is being trained by a girl named Brianna King. She's a professional horse trainer. I happened to take her and a large group of her friends on a horseback tour at the end of September. And watching this girl and how she trains horses is a real treat. Now she has this animal in a round pen, and she's doing exactly what I was describing. So this horse is going to start moving in one direction, and then she's going to step in front of the moving horse. I know it doesn't sound like a great thing to do, but it's going to cause that horse to turn and go the opposite way. This is the beginning of training. And you'll even see that stick and string or stick and cord come into view here in a moment. Now turn, there's your cord. Now the horse is moving in the other direction and moving into like it's just a gentle, what we call lope. So this is how the training begins. Now, horses need to be also desensitized, not only to your training aids like that cord and stick. You would think it scares them, but if you do it right, they come to accept it's just part of the day, I guess is the best word to describe it. You can bring that thing out and start whacking the ground with it. The horse might spook or startle, but if you use a retreat and withdrawal method, you make the horse scared, and then you withdraw the stimulus that is scaring or making it nervous. Horses are like people. They're very curious animals, and they will come up and take a look at what was this thing that was beating the ground and see that there is nothing wrong with it. Well, eventually I was able to take that same cord and stick and rub it all over Maverick, even swinging the rope around his midsection, around his feet, and he wouldn't even budge because he knew it was not a threat to him. But when I used it as a training implement, you bet I got him to do what I wanted him to do. Now, the same thing is scary objects like trash bags, water bottles that crinkle and things. These things may spook a horse. So we want to bomb-proof the horse literally today. You want a horse that's not afraid of anything. And you can do that, and it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes a great deal of patience. But eventually, many horses don't really get spooked or threatened by anything. Well, I wouldn't say anything, but most things. So how do you go about doing that during the Civil War? You have a bunch of green horses, and when I mean green horses, I mean untrained, and you have an equal number of green recruits. These green recruits don't know anything. They're being taught by veteran cavalry and veteran horse masters, literal horse masters, on how to desensitize these animals to things like small arms fire and cannon fire. One of the ways they accomplished this was to place the small arms fire on one side of a field and the unsuspecting green horses on the other side. And they would begin to fire their arms. The horses would probably panic a little bit. And then what you're going to do, you cease fire, give the horse time to decompress. As the horse gets used to this, you're going to bring the source of the agitation or the threatening object closer to the animal. And eventually, if you do it right, by the time you're done, these men are going to be firing their carbines and pistols from on top of the horse because the horses aren't viewing them as a threat any longer. Now, you have to look at other things that cavalry and artillerymen would have been carrying around with them. Things that you don't even give a second thought to, but bugles, drums, fluttering flags, pennants, saber strokes, and the rattling of equipment that's attached to these horses. Anything can spook a horse. So you want to desensitize them to as much as possible. The more you do this, the better off you will be. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to try to stop it before it starts because it can be kind of loud. So watch the volume, whatever you're listening to. I don't want anybody's eardrums to get blown away. All right, so what we have here is Brianna, the girl that was training the horse in the other video. So she practices what she preaches. She is right now in this video at a competition. She's firing a black powder pistol. Now, there's no bullets in this, it's all blanks, and she's shooting at balloons. Now, just in case you're wondering, this particular horse, you can buy hearing protection for them. And I did ask her, and she said, yes, the horse does have some earplugs, but if you've shot a pistol or a rifle, it doesn't get rid of all of it. But I want you to see how this horse reacts with her firing the pistol and also how she controls, what an excellent job she does controlling this horse. So here we go. We're not done yet. She got more to go. All right, so I don't know about you guys, but I think Jeb Stewart, Alfred Pleasanton, or even George Armstrong Custer would be proud to have her as a member of their cavalry. That is just outstanding. But it's not just adults that can do this. If you take the time and effort to learn, you can even train little kids to ride horses and even compete, because if the drive is there, you will succeed. Now, this young girl is 7 years old. She lives local in this area. I know her mom, and they own a stable. This young gal is going to be riding a 1,000-pound horse, and she's going to manipulate and control this horse like it's literally a child's toy. And this girl weighs probably maybe 60, 70 pounds soaking wet. So she's just going to be riding this horse at probably maybe just under a gallop, and she's going to be circling around some barrels. Look at her, tiny. And there she goes. So she made it in 17 seconds, and you guys got to listen to a little bit of White Snake as a bonus. So that's always good. Now, horses are also good for the elderly. In particular, some guides that, have just had surgery on their neck and are being held together by plates and screws, like me, who is now on this horse trying to trot. So you can tell by the way I'm riding this horse, I am anything but a horse master. I take lessons myself to keep myself in shape, I guess you would say. So I won't bother you to watch that any longer than I need to. So it is a process, but it can be done. It can be done today, and it was obviously done 159 years ago. And once you have trained a horse and bonded with that horse, there is a bond of trust and respect that extends to both the horse and the person riding it. And this is probably one of the reasons why so many soldiers, and I don't care if you're George Meade and it's all up with Baldy, down to the lowliest private, lamented the loss of their animals, because not only was it their means of transportation, but it was also a companion and something that the men took care of, and the horse took care of them. Now, horses, how do you know which horse to get? Well, horses are like soldiers. They have to pass an inspection. You can't just walk in and say, hey, I want to join the cavalry. So these inspections were carried out by veteran horsemen or veteran cavalrymen. And what they did is they gathered the horses that were going to go into military service that were brought from a cellar, and they had to do an examination on them. So they're going to look at things like, is this horse able to see? Can he hear? Is he free from injuries? Is he able to walk or trot without difficulty or getting short of breath? They want to see if the animal would give the hoof, or at least try to. And that's important because you have to clean their hoofs and you have to shoe them as well. But the big difference was only male horses were accepted, and they had to be gelded or castrated. Now, if you bought a personal mount, if you were an officer and you were able to purchase your mount, it didn't matter if it was a stallion or not. You bought the horse, it's your horse. But if it's a government issue horse, they preferred only males. I'm sure there were some females that got put in with the mix, but either way, they had to be gelded. Now, in addition to looking them over, they would measure the horse, because horses had to be certain sizes. Now, we measure horses today in hands. In particularly, one hand is the equivalent of 4 inches. It's about the average width of a male's hand from the index to the pinky finger. Now, if you take a look at that top picture, you see this beautiful horse, and it's got 2 lines that are almost intersecting. At the very top of the line, at the base of the horse's neck, it says withers, or the vicinity of where the withers would normally be. And then it extends down to the ground, or basically adjacent to his front hoof. So you're going to measure the horse, its height, from its withers to the ground by its front hoof. So if that horse measures, say, 16 hands, that means he's 5'4" or 64 inches from ground to withers. That does not take into consideration the size or shape of the horse's head, which may make them even look bigger. I've seen in my travels horses that are as small as a 14 and a half hands and all the way up to 19. This horse, it's 19 hands. He's 6'3" at the withers. He is like a Goliath, but he's probably one of the most gentle horses you could ever meet. Now, one of the ways that they're going to guess or approximate the age of a horse, unless you actually know its birth date, one of the ways that they could measure the age of a horse, or estimate it, was to look at the teeth, because unlike humans, our teeth eventually stop growing. But a horse's teeth don't stop growing, or erupting is probably a better word, throughout their lifetime. Now, you see the bottom picture. A young lady has the horse's mouth open, or at least a jar, and you see that red arrow pointing to his corner incisors. These are the incisor teeth. These are what the horse uses to snip grass before they chew it. The molars are behind those. But notice that where that arrow is pointing, it's pointing right at, it looks like a little yellow or tan line. Well, a horse doesn't have tartar buildup. That is called Galvane's groove. And all horses have these on their lateral incisor. And it's one of the ways that they can gauge the age of a horse. So right around 10 years old, this horse is going to develop a groove. If that line would be right about here, well, that's half his tooth. So he'd probably be about 15 years old. So this horse you're looking at is probably around 13, 14 years old. That groove, if you follow my mouse, is going to go all the way down to the base of his tooth, which would mean he's about 20. And then it will disappear starting at the top, just like it appeared. So if you only see a groove from the middle of his tooth down, that's an older horse. That's around my age. That's when you want to retire them, not use them for military service. Now, cavalry and artillery horses, cavalry 15 to 16 hands tall. So we already saw 16 hands. So, you know, it gives you different perspective. 15 is just a little smaller. They preferred the age to be 5 to 9 years old. That's normally when the horses have the most vim and vigor. And for the artillery, they had some additional requirements, such as they wanted strong draft or drought horses, like a Belgian or a Brabant that you saw earlier. They had to be 15.3 hands tall, plus or minus an inch. Between the ages of 5 and 7 years old, they had to be broken to harness. And that is because when you're a draft horse or an artillery horse, that's probably what you're going to be in, is a harness pulling the limber and the caisson and the artillery piece itself. Full chest and shoulders, free of vice. Now, what does that mean? That doesn't, you want a docile or somewhat of a docile horse. Vice doesn't mean somebody that, you know, is real wild or anything like that, but draft horses have a tendency to be a little more on the docile side. So having them around canons is probably, say, a little better than a thoroughbred. And the average weight for these horses should be around 1,000 to 1,200 pounds. Now, where did you go to get these horses, to get them inspected, to purchase them and all this stuff? Well, toward the middle portion of the Civil War, depots, cavalry depots were set up. And this is where they purchased horses for military service. It's also where wounded horses or sick horses went to, you know, that had a chance to recover. And if you take a look at the picture on the right, this is at Gettysburg. Gettysburg was located in Maryland. Today, where it used to sit is Joint Base Anacostia, which is just across from Reagan International Airport. There's really nothing left of it now, but it was built, I believe, at a peak to hold around 30,000 animals, and at its peak, it held around a little over 20,000. And they had all kinds of people there that were charged with the care of the horses, including people like this fellow on the left, and that is a farrier. Farriers provide horses with hoof care, and they also shoe the horses. So even if a horse doesn't have shoe, their feet still, or their hooves still need cleaned, and they still need trimmed and filed regularly to keep them healthy. So they would have around 1,000 farriers working at a place like Gettysburg. So that's no small chunk of manpower. Now, the big difference that you're going to see is between the North and South, that is, the Army of the Potomac and the Northern Army, cavalry and artillery horses and quartermaster horses were all issued by the government. So if you were a cavalryman or an artilleryman, it didn't matter. Your unit or you specifically were issued a horse, and that was your horse. Well, in the Southern Army, the cavalry had to provide their own mounts. Artillery, quartermaster horses were provided by the government, by the military. But if you were riding with Jeb Stuart, And notice I'm a little late mentioning Jeb, a little joke there. If you were riding in the Confederate cavalry, you would have your horse that you brought from home with you. This horse would be appraised by the Confederate government, and it was usually at a standard rate, say $100, $150. You really didn't get to argue with them. Now, they would provide that animal with food, forage, and the necessary supplies to care for it, and give you 40 cents a day in addition to for the use of your horse. Now, what happens if your horse dies? Well, if it dies in combat, it's killed in action, or it dies from wounds sustained while it was in battle, then you would be technically reimbursed for the standard rate that you were quoted. Now, as the war went on and the South was starting to run low on money and it was over inflated anyway, you were lucky if you received any at all. Now, what happened if you were just out walking your horse, it slipped, fell, broke its leg, and you had to euthanize it? Well, you received nothing at all. So if a cavalryman loses a horse, he's now an infantryman. But normally what they did is they furloughed that particular soldier home so he could procure himself another horse, if at all possible. Now, one of the things horses had to learn was to leap ditches and obstacles. We go back a little bit here, backtrack to some of the training, and some of these obstacles, well, if you look at Gettysburg, there's plenty of obstacles. I mean, you could leap over a little creek of Plum Run. There's plenty of fences and rocks and things that get in the way. So these horses had to know what to do when they were cued by their rider on jumping over or leaping over an obstacle. Not only that, but the men were taught to saddle their horses, put the bridles, everything on with very little warning, and to do it very quickly. You never know when you were going to be called to mount up and to go, either into combat or run a patrol or something. Didn't matter. You had to be ready. And they also were taught to mount the horses from either side. Normally, horses are mounted on the left side, which is called the near side of the horse. But they were also taught to mount on the right side of the horse, which is called the off side. Now, if you're wondering how much care these horses got, they got quite a bit. Even though many of their lifespans were not that long, the soldiers tended to them first. So if you were in the artillery or you were in the cavalry and you heard reveille, well, as soon as you got your boots on, probably the next thing you were going to hear was stable call. This means everybody go get your horse or horses, and you're going to groom and brush them, clean their hooves, you're going to feed them, you're going to water them and get them ready for the day's activities. And then you can have your breakfast. Well, periodically through the day, they're going to have what's called a water call. Stream or running water is best. They try to avoid stagnant water because it's not healthy to drink for people or horses for that matter. So they would take their horses to a water source. If they couldn't, if it was too far, too inconvenient, men would be dispatched in order to bring the water to the horses. So this is why they spent so much time caring for these animals, because they had been trained, they had been prepared, and now it's getting ready for them to go into action. Now, one of the things that you'll hear about is the Southern Cavalry was great. Well, it was at the beginning of the American Civil War. The North, you got to consider, was very urban. They had a great deal of means so far as procuring horses, all the equipment, feed, everything you would need. But look at the men who would ride them. If you're from a larger city, you might be a clerk that works in a store and you might live right above the store. You may not need to have need of a horse. You might be comfortable seeing them in pulling wagons or a carriage, but you may not own one. And now you find yourself in the cavalry. So now you have to learn all this stuff from scratch. Now, the Southern horsemen, while they lacked in necessities and later on horse flesh itself, they couldn't be rivaled with their riding ability. But as the war progressed, the scales are going to even. I remember the late Mike Phipps, he said in order to make a good cavalryman back in the Civil War, it would take about 2 years. Well, 2 years or roughly 2 years after the start of the Civil War, what's going to happen right around June 9th? Battle of Brandy Station. In my book, I noted that there was one particular officer said that once that battle concluded, they knew that the Northern Army was now all, if not, they were on par with their Southern counterparts so far as skill and ability. And that was only going to improve in the years to come. So now that we have this beautiful creature all mounted and prepared and ready for battle, we take a look at the Battle of Gettysburg itself. Now, what is the exact number of horses and mules that were present at Gettysburg? I don't think anybody truly knows. I've seen estimates as low as 60 and as high as 80. I would be inclined to think between 75 and 80,000 were probably a reasonable estimate. So, but this is a logistical nightmare because, I mean, if you want to divide them up, all right, just say each side had 40,000, but either way, it's a logistical nightmare because the feed and forage for these animals, you're looking at almost 1 million pounds of feed. And when I say feed, I'm talking oats, barley, or corn. And then about 1.12 million pounds of hay over a 3-day period. And the hay would serve as forage. And then the water requirements, you're talking almost 500,000 to 1 million gallons of water per day. And they always talk about why the wells were, dry as a bone following the battle. Well, if you think about it, there's a good reason right there. You have an animal that drinks on average of 5 to 10 gallons of water per day just to keep a normal state of digestion and hydration. So yeah, it's a logistical nightmare. And I always kind of chuckle when they say this person didn't move too slowly, or this person should have done this. It's like, well, you got to take a look too. Horses need care too. So July 1st through the 3rd of 1863. Gettysburg and its road access is going to be the catalyst for the battle to begin. Gettysburg with its road access provides a very convenient meeting point for soldiers both north and south, and that is what is going to bring both armies to Gettysburg. The ground, yes, it's great, but that's going to be subsequent to the roads. Now, the day before the battle begins, we know that Johnston Pettigrew and his North Carolinians are going to approach the town of Gettysburg from the west when they spy John Buford and his cavalry division coming up toward Gettysburg from the south. Pettigrew was told, don't start a fight. Our army is still not all together. So Pettigrew is going to dutifully retreat, reports this information, but it's not taken to heart. Maybe it's a small patrol, maybe it's just some militia. But either way, the Confederates are going to be back. And when Buford comes in, he sees the advantage too, but he's not going to leave. He's going to ensure that reinforcements will be sent on the morning of July 1st, and he's going to get ready because he knows the Confederates are going to be back. But they're coming back. Why? Because of shoes, of all things. Well, people ask me, was that true? And I say, well, kinda it is, because if you look at it from the eyes of a reinforced reconnaissance, there's about 2,700 pair of Union cavalry boots and horseshoes, and they were all being used by Buford's men and horses. What better way to force your enemy to show his hand? So Buford will set up vedettes and mounted sentries west and north of Gettysburg to cover the road accesses that the Confederates might use. When the attacks start, Buford's going to be at a disadvantage because he's going to have to detail 1 out of every 4 soldiers to hold the horses. Well, yes, these horses are trained, but they're still horses. If you start shooting around a horse and you're not holding it or controlling it, it's probably going to run away. They're the smart ones. So Buford's down 25%, but he has carbine that fires 5 to 6 shots a minute. And he also has the versatility of those horses where he can move very quickly if he needs to. He's going to be facing off against Henry Heath, who's going to be outnumbering Buford, at least early on in the contest. Now, Buford's men, when the Confederates get too close to each ridge, they just hop on those horses and ride as fast as they can to the next ridge. And the Confederates are now playing catch up the whole morning hours. As the afternoon hours arrive, you're going to see more Union soldiers arrive into Gettysburg. More Confederates are going to arrive into Gettysburg. The battle's going to move to the north end of the town as well. And who do we have here? We have 4th United States Artillery, Battery G, commanded by Lieutenant Bayard Wilkeson. Wilkeson and 2 brigades are stuck out on Barlow's Knoll north of the town of Gettysburg and are going to bear the full brunt of Dole's and John Gordon's Georgians, as well as artillery fire. So to steady his men's nerves, Bayard Wilkeson, like a statue on his horse, stood in the middle of 2 pieces right out front of those guns to steady his men. And even John Gordon lamented the loss of such a brave man, but he knew that by taking this guy out, it was going to increase their chances of overrunning the knoll. And an artillery shell was fired that ripped through his leg, killed the horse, and later on, Bayard Wilkeson will succumb to his wounds on the evening of July 1st. Now, Lee's army is going to push the Union soldiers right through the town of Gettysburg. Eventually, those men are going to rally up on Cemetery Hill, later on Culp's Hill, and then finally along Cemetery Ridge. Now, John Reynolds, when he gets to Gettysburg, he's going to lead the First Corps as reinforcements in the morning hours. He's going to send messages back to George Meade, the commander, of what's going on. And he's going to call on a man named Stephen Weld, and he's going to tell him to ride to Meade and give him this message that I'm at Gettysburg. We're going to fight him through the towns, street by street, if necessary. But Weld has got a problem. Meade is in Taneytown, or at least in that vicinity. And he's got about a 12 to 14 mile ride ahead of him. Now, how fast can that horse get there? Well, that depends on the horse and its stamina. Now, shortly after Weld departs, John Reynolds is going to be killed in action. And I'm not going to go over it now, but I want you to take a look at this horse that he's on. Fancy, his horse's name was, a black stallion. If you take a look underneath John Reynolds' horse, you can see him right there. He's still got him. That's a stallion. Now, he's got 2 hooves that are up. Well, we'll talk about that here very soon because it's a well-known myth. Now, how fast could Stephen Weld get to Taneytown without killing his horse? Because he was told, if you have to kill the horse, kill it from exhaustion and procure another one. Well, a walk on a horse, if you take a look at the top slide, you'll see me and Maverick. And we're just kind of moseying through the farm adjacent to the Sarah Patterson farm. And we're at a walk, so maybe 2 to 4 miles an hour. And these are approximate. Again, it's going to depend on the horse's size and stamina and age. The picture to the right would be a horse at a trot. This is about 8 miles an hour. And this little horse here is about 14 and a half hands. That's Simon, him and his blonde hair. And then finally, you have a canter, 10 to 16 miles an hour. You got this horse down here. Sorry, I'm pulling a Rick Schrader here, making everybody nauseous. That's a canter. And then finally gallop, you're looking at about 25 to 30 miles per hour. And that's the picture to the right. Now, just to give you an idea, the horses at the Kentucky Derby average gallop speed is about 37 miles an hour. But those horses are bred and taken care of and trained for that. You're talking about possibly just a standard run-of-the-mill Army issue horse. But if you play it right, you can do it. You can gallop that horse because they need rest after about 1 to 2 miles, and then slow them down to a trot, and then maybe up to a canter, and then maybe back down to a trot. Weld noted that he left Gettysburg around 10 a.m. and arrived at Meade's headquarters at 20 after 11. So if that is accurate, and depending on the actual mileage, that's going to put his average speed at probably around 8 to 10 miles per hour. So probably somewhere between a fast trot and a slow canter. So it didn't say whether or not he ended up killing the horse. I was not able to find that. Now, Union soldiers, we got them. They're on Cemetery Hill. Everybody's kind of in a panic, but who is going to arrive there to calm everybody down and rally the troops up there? It's Winfield Scott Hancock. Well, Hancock, you can tell by his statue, he had to have been wounded because he has that one hoof up right here. Well, the old legend says if all hooves are down, the horse survived. One hoof up, it was wounded. Two hooves up, the rider perished. So we got Hancock and Reynolds both hold true to this. And you got Meade, who is not wounded, all legs down. And you got Sedgwick, same thing. Slocum, same thing. But I want you to take a look at Hancock's horse and Hancock himself, and then take a look over here on the right. This picture on the right is not taken in Gettysburg. I'm sure you probably have already figured that out. This is taken in Rome on Capitoline Hill. This is the equestrian statue of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who lived about 1900 or so years ago. But take a look at his horse, take a look at his posture, take a look at his hand and the hoof of the horse. If you put Hancock's head on him, you would swear it's the same statue. So is it really because Hancock was wounded, or did somebody make that up and it just happens to hold true? Well, the final verdict came from the man himself, Henry Kirk Bush Brown. Very famous sculptor. He sculpts the equestrian statue of Reynolds, Meade, Sedgwick, and also the bust of Lincoln in the National Cemetery. Now, William Stork in 1915, who was basically the guide superintendent, I guess you could say, communicated with Henry Kirk Bush Brown because this mystery or this myth had been flourishing from before that. And Henry Kirk Bush Brown said, absolutely not. Reynolds was a man in action on July 1st. That's how he wanted the horse to be pictured, moving in action. So yes, it has been debunked. It is not true. But some people will still say it. And if that's what they want to believe, well, that's okay too. Now on July 2nd, Lee has won his victory, but he wants something more concrete. He sends out reconnaissance in the way of Captain Samuel Johnston. Jeb Stuart still has not arrived. If he had been there, this is the information he would probably be providing Lee. Now Johnston has to do it. Johnston goes and reconnoiters the southern end of the field. And when he returns, he's going to tell Lee that he observed no Union soldiers down by a rocky hill and some peach trees. Well, we all know that he couldn't have gone he had to go a lot farther because John Buford and his cavalry were situated in the peach orchard at that time. But either way, Lee is going to make his attack plans based on this faulty intelligence on July 2nd. Now, Longstreet is not real keen about this, but he obeys. Some say slowly, but either way, around 11:30, 12 o'clock, he's going to begin his march to the launch point. While this is going on, toward the early afternoon hours, Dan Sickles is going to move his entire 10,000-man corps out toward the Emmitsburg Road to take advantage of that high ground, that ridge that runs under the road, and also the higher ground, or what looks to be higher ground, in the peach orchard. He bends his line back, crosses the south end of a wheat field, and anchors his men into Devil's Den, leaving Little Round Top and the Union line along Cemetery Ridge abandoned. Around 3:30, these attacks are going to commence with the Confederates. When Meade finds out what Sickles has done, he tells Sickles, who's riding to a council of war, he goes, don't even bother getting off your horse. I'll meet you out there. So Sickles is going to ride off, and Meade is calling for Baldy, who is not saddled or ready. So Pleasanton will tell Meade, here, take my horse. His name is Slicky. Well, there's your first clue right there. So Meade's going to hop on Slicky, rides out to the peach orchard, confronts Sickles. Well, what is decided upon as the attacks are unfolding, that infantry and artillery will be sent to help bolster Sickles' line. Well, as this is going on, a large shell goes flying over Meade's head, and Slicky's lands, and the horse begins to spook and panic. Well, Meade tries to rein him in, and if you ever taken a look at some of these equestrian statues, many of them have two sets of reins. One is a snaffle, which actually fits in the horse's mouth like you would normally think you would see. And then the other one is a curb, which hangs by the cheeks and down. Well, Pleasanton, you always used the snaffle. Meade had a 50-50 chance and guessed wrong. He pulled the curb rein, which sent Slicky into a fit. And the horse bucked and bolted and took and carried Meade right back to Cemetery Ridge, where Sickles' line should have been in the first place. So now we have July 2nd going on. And one of the things that is going to be sent for is the artillery. Well, one of the units, it's going to be the 9th Massachusetts. It's under McGilvery's artillery brigade. They're going to be sent out toward the area of the peach orchard just off the Wheatfield Road area. And they immediately begin taking casualties as they're riding out. Now, take a look at this picture. We've seen it in the previous slide, but this is how they would have maneuvered on these horses. This is called riding pillion. So the front horse is called, you'll never guess it, the lead horse. The middle horse is called the swing horse. And if you see, they're all on the left horses or the near side, and the middle or the swing horse rider has a whip in his hand. That's just for insurance in case the horse don't want to go. Now we also have the fellow that's nearest the caisson and the wheel of, or the limber or the caisson nearest the wheel, and that is called the wheel horse. So in order, they're lead, swing, and wheel. And the ones on the left are the near, ones on the right are offside. Now, once these horses got the battery into position, they just didn't take the harnesses off and let them go wander and eat grass. You may have to get out of there in a hurry. So in many cases, the horses that were attached to the limber and the caisson stayed with those two pieces in case they had to limber up and get the guns out of there. So needless to say, the 9th Massachusetts is going to start taking heavy casualties. And as the Union line begins to crumble, especially in the area of the peach orchard, the 9th Massachusetts will begin doing what they call retreat by prolong. Well, all that is in English is you face the cannon toward the enemy, tie the rope around the lunette at the back of the trail, and attach it to the pintle of the limber. As the gun fires, it's going to recoil, and then the horses and or men will begin moving off at a slow trot to move the gun to its next position, and it can be loaded while it's in movement. Well, the 9th Massachusetts is taking heavy casualties. So now the men are going to retreat or retreat by recoil. So, excuse me. That means the men are going to become the beasts of burden. So as the guns fire, Bigelow's men will pull those cannon, and as they keep pulling and pulling and pulling and helping the horses that are left, they get to the area of the Trollsel farm. And that's when McGilvery is going to ride up and say, look, we have to buy time to repair the damage on Cemetery Ridge and rally the men. So the 9th Massachusetts is out there now to buy time. And that's exactly what they do, but it's going to cost them 80 out of the 88 horses that they brought into Gettysburg. Now, the result of July 2nd, the Federal line held. Baldy, Meade's mount, is going to suffer a career-ending wound. He's shot in the abdomen. The bullet almost hit Meade, but it passed through his pant leg and hit the horse instead. And Meade said no amount of spurring could get Baldy to move. And he goes, I think Baldy's done for this time. So on the morning of July 3rd, the Federal line is still holding, but the area of Culp's Hill. The lower portion of the hill was seized by Confederates, and the Union Army wants it back. At dawn, they begin launching artillery barrage, and then there's the infantry assault to push the Confederates away. This battle on Culp's Hill is going to rage from about 10:30, or I'm sorry, from dawn till about 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning. But the important thing is it will be in Union hands at the end of July 3rd, and Lee's hope to use it as a diversion all but evaporates. But Lee feels he can still win. He still feels that he can get the victory he wants. He will strike the middle of the Union line along Cemetery Ridge. He will send nearly 12,500 men over a mile of open ground. And once they strike Cemetery Ridge and drive the Union soldiers from that ridge, they can finish up the victory by driving them off the hill. But Lee is going to soften up the center. He's going to send out the artillery that he has and muster every available gun to shell Cemetery Ridge and the hill to get rid of the Union forces that are there and their cannon. Longstreet's going to be in overall command with Pickett, Pettigrew, and Trimble serving under him. Now, Lee is going to issue a very specific order ordering his men, his officers specifically, not to ride. The risk is going to be too high, casualties, loss of animal flesh. It's not worth it. But as we know, many of those officers rode their horses, and just about all of them that did ended up either wounded, killed along with their mounts. Now on July 3rd, the heat was horrible. The humidity was terrible, and it was exacerbated, no breeze. So when the cannons do open about 1 o'clock, the mist or the smoke hangs like a mist over the ground. And this is going to cause the artillerists to not be able to sight their pieces and overshoot. So each side's going to suffer some collateral damage. Many of the horses that were near Meade's headquarters were killed during this barrage. And Battery A, 4th U.S. Artillery, this is Cushing's battery. At the end of the day on July 3rd, they will have lost 83 of their 90 animals. Now, during the cannonade, there were 2 generals known to be mounted, riding the line to steady their men. The first one was Hancock, we know that. And it wasn't Hancock's personal mount. Hancock's personal mount was basically too skittish to go. Hancock tried spurring him, but he would not go. And this is according to his wife. So he had to borrow the mount of another soldier, and that's the one he was riding up and down the line on Cemetery Ridge. The other soldier was on the other side of the field, painting a similar picture, and that was James Longstreet. Well, you know, James Longstreet riding his pony, but it's not really a pony. Now, when this was dedicated in 1998, everybody flipped out because why? Well, instead of having, you know, no feet or all feet on the ground, they got 1.5 hoofs up. So they boogered that up right away. So, but remember, that is a myth. So, and Gary Castile, the sculptor of this, before he even made this monument or the casting for it, he sought out a horse that lived in the Gettysburg area named Summer. And Summer was a Belgian quarter horse mix, and he was able to ride this horse, and he actually took measurements of this horse to make sure that it would be displayed properly in the right size. We have to remember that Longstreet was a big fellow, measuring about 6'2" and weighing about 230 pounds. Now take a look at the 2 pictures next to Longstreet. These are people that are doing either reining or sometimes barrel racing, which requires the horses to sometimes very abruptly stop and or turn. And when this happens, it almost has like an accordion effect. Now, tell me that this fellow and this lady don't look maybe a little too big for their horses. It's possible, but this is kind of the same situation that is going on with Longstreet's horse. So when Gary Castile, I talked to him, I said, I measured that horse to be about 15.5 to 16 hands high, roughly, if it was standing upright. And he said, that sounds about right. So that is not necessarily a small horse. You put someone 6'2" on a horse like that, even the biggest horse is going to look small with a guy that's 6'2" on it. Now, Longstreet, the assault fails. Lee and his army are going to suffer approximately 50% casualties. Most of those mounted officers were either killed in action, wounded, or captured. Two pictures are going on opposite sides of the field. Lee will ride out to the point of woods, greet the retreating men, and accept blame for the loss at Gettysburg. Mee returns from the safety of Powers Hill to Cemetery Ridge, asks if the charge has been repulsed. They tell him it has, and he just says 2 words: thank God. Now, the aftermath of this battle, we all know, 51,000 men, soldiers killed, wounded, and missing, captured. Horse flesh, it varies, but you can bet that about 3,000 to 5,000 animals died during this engagement. And that's just a small figure of the 1.5 million animals that perished overall. The photograph that you see at the top, you can see the dead horses in the Tawnytown Road adjacent to Meade's headquarters, and one in the little orchard just in the front of the house. And the picture on the right will show you dead horses next to a caisson and limber along Cemetery Ridge. These horses, some were buried and some were set on fire. If you take a look at the Elliott map or have a chance, especially in the area of the Trossel farm and also over here in Meade's headquarters, you'll see, and if you look at the legend, it'll tell you what horses, it looks like a little comma. But either way, you can see it gives you a guesstimate of the number of horses, although the Elliott map was more intended for the soldiers, not the animals. Now, today you can go to Gettysburg, take a ride into history, and you can do it with a very unique vantage point, and that's on the back of a horse. If you don't want to go on the back of a horse, well, you can hop on the back of a carriage and go that way as well. If you happen to be lucky enough to own your own animal, you can trailer that animal to Gettysburg, to a designated point by the National Park Service, and ride your own mount on the hallowed ground. But before you do that, I would strongly urge you to go to the National Parks website and check all the rules and restrictions, because again, we don't want to give anybody any reason to close these horse trails down. So use a grain of common sense. And that's Maverick there on the right. Isn't he a handsome fella? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the fun things that horses can be used for today, other than participating in wars. So they were continued to use through World War II. Even Gettysburg now has a mounted horse patrol. And Winston Churchill summed it up best. There's something about the outside of a horse that's good for the inside of a person. And yeah, sometimes they'll make us laugh too, like poor Maverick up here. I dressed him up like a licensed battlefield guide for Halloween. Don't worry, he paid his license fee. Down here, you're going to see the movie, I think it was Mall Cop. This is Paul Blart. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But this is one thing, if you're never comfortable around horses, this is the last thing you don't want to do. All right. I just find that very funny. And we'll move on here. But horses also have a more solemn duty and therapeutic effect for some people. You can see the United States Army, the caisson platoon that operates out of Fort Myer, just adjacent to Arlington. It's their duty and their honor to carry deceased veterans to their final resting place. And in the old tradition, they are riding pillion on the near side horses. The horse on the right side that has a little coat on, looks like it's visiting someone in a wheelchair. This is a therapy horse that is taken to hospitals. And this horse will go and visit. And this is a stallion. So, I mean, it's amazing how gentle this animal is. You can find videos about this horse on YouTube if you want to watch them. And down below, children with severe autism, ADHD, all benefit from the non-judgmental and nature of horses that can be trained, if done properly, into gentle giants. And that's a far cry from the last picture on the right, which is the memorial to the Civil War horse and mule. There's one in Virginia and also one at Fort Riley in Kansas. And if you take a look at that horse, you can see he's pretty beat up, ribs are visible, hip bones, he's in sad shape. But that was the sacrifice they paid as well. Now, I want to thank you guys all for watching and wish you all happy trails. This is Colonel, the old vet of 18 battles, including the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, if you're interested, I'm just going to do this because I can. This is my book. It was just released in August. It's now starting to get around and get read, and I'm very happy about that. So if you're looking to get a copy, you can go to gettysburgpublishing.com and Kevin Drake will mail you out a copy right away. I think he even has a few signed ones left. The Heritage Center down in Gettysburg on Steinwire, the Visitor Center bookstore at the Park Service. If you know Jim Schmick up, I think it's Mechanicsburg, Civil War and More, you can go up and get a copy from Jim. Support local businesses. Gettysburg Tour Center, the Jenny Wade House. I think the Inn on Cemetery Hill has a few copies. You can go and get one on Amazon if you're, not local to the Gettysburg area, or can get them from the others. Or you can, if you see me, you can get me, because Jim Hessler told me, he goes, a good author will always have a box of his own books in his car. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your kind attention. I hope you enjoyed this.